the ultimate guide to product interviews, right? So before I start, let me tell you what product interviews are. So I'm sure a lot of you know what product management is, and I think it's generally the art of knowing pain points and finding out customer problems and solving them. uh, Product interviews are structurally prepared to test three core aspects of your ability. Number one is product sense, which is this innate ability to get things right more often than wrong. And of course, there are frameworks you use to ensure that you get things right more often than you get them wrong. But that is number one, which is going to be the core focus of what we are doing. Number two is problem solving. Are you able to apply concepts, apply thoughts of solving problems? Sorry. um on your own, or solving problems that are very ambiguous and very vague, because that's the kind of problems that you will feel. And the third are analytical questions, which are more to understand, hey, how quickly, how comfortable are you with numbers, how can you estimate things, how can you drill down into root causes of things, etc. Of course, there are other interview rounds and aspects as well, behavioral rounds and all of those things, but I wouldn't call them as product rounds. They're more of knowing you as a person and ensuring that you have what it takes to sort of be a product manager long term. But what we will extensively focus on today is problem solving and product sense, and of course, a few interview tips and tricks on top of that. So with that, let's begin. So we start with your instructor, which is me. So I, like Aris mentioned very kindly, I've been here in product management for 7 years now. I still like to call it an art more than a job or skill. It's very intangible. A lot of things are not very uh, easy to understand or easy to coach and train, which is why I call it an art. My expertise has been majorly working with early stage products, because that's where I felt I've been able to contribute or impact the most. I worked with an edtech startup early on in my career that later got acquired by Byju's, and then I worked on Vyapar, where I work right now and head the product team, which was again something that I joined fairly early. I mean, very 28, 30 people in the team at that time, and we've been able to grow to to being one of the fastest growing accounting, billing, business management softwares in India right now. So that's been my expertise with product management. Over weekends and free times, I love to mentor folks. I get a good kick from uh, seeing people grow, seeing people think better. By think better, I don't mean in terms of anything else. I mean product thinking is what really gives me a good kick. So I spend a lot of time there, and of course, I am available on LinkedIn for any chat, help, thoughts that you might have. So yeah, that's about me, which is not as important for this as this. So, what are we going to cover? We are going to cover the structure of a product interview to start off. This is going to give you a general understanding of how to solve product interview questions. We will then move to frameworks of problem solving, really important two frameworks, which I have found super useful in all my thinking and all my product management scenarios. After that, we will move to solving product design questions in particular. So product design questions are the heart and soul of PM interviews. They make or break your interview. So we will spend a lot of time there, and then finally we will conclude with generic tips and tricks. So yeah, it's hopefully we are able to run on time and close all of these. Uh, and then of course, like Ari said, there's a small giveaway, which is a glossary which just helps you get used to some of the key terms that you will face when you are in the product interview preparation. Right, let's look at the structure of a product interview. So any question that you get asked in a product interview employs a common underlying structure, right? And how you look at that structure, or how you are able to apply that structure well enough, decides if you are able to make it or break it, right? We will look at each of these in detail when we move to the next slide. But before that, what I want you to look at is look at each of the section of the next slide and ask yourself the question in terms of how often have I done this in a product interview situation, if you've been there, or even if you've been there in a mock situation. And that's sort of where you will gain more value, if you understand of what has not been happening and now you've been able to do, right? So here we go. The first thing that you need to do in a product management interview is listen. Now it's very obvious, it may seem like the most obvious thing to do, but listening and taking notes is the most important thing you can do when you are starting to understand what the interviewer is asking you, right? Now this is working in both remote interviews and in interviews that are in person. Remote interviews even more so, because you don't have a chance to sort of have a whiteboard or have a shared space where you are talking about things. Most of the things are talked about on online like this, which is why having a notepad handy, working towards making quick notes of what the person is saying, noting down keywords, etc., is very, very important for every product interview. Of course, making eye contact, showing interest, excitement, and genuine happiness to be in the interview are all blanket necessities that you must start for any product management interview question, right? The second is asking clarifying questions. Now, most people tend to ask clarifying questions as a checkbox activity. Of course, we will dive deep into how you need to ask clarifying questions and why clarifying questions are so important. But even before that, to give a prelude of that, most people ask clarifying questions just because they've read it in a structure and ask them. But if you ask the right clarifying questions, it sort of decides how your interview is going to go. And I'm not exaggerating when I say that. Fundamentally, if you are able to, let's take an example, right? Let's take an example of Swiggy, right? Your problem quotes Swiggy as a problem space, and you are trying to solve something in that domain. Now, on the face of it, Swiggy seems fairly obvious, right? And you look at it from this holistic application that sort of serves your need. So for example, if I ask most people what's the first thing that comes to their mind when they hear the word Swiggy, they'd probably talk about food delivery, because that's where it works for them the most, right? Inherently, we tend to just absorb that and go forward with that clarification. However, Swiggy can actually mean a lot of different things. Swiggy, on the top of it, can mean food delivery, grocery delivery, dine out, hand picked, etc., etc. On If you go one layer deeper, Swiggy can mean the end customers like us. Swiggy can mean the delivery personnel. Swiggy can mean the restaurant. Swiggy can mean the dark house. The dark store from where the groceries are pulled. Swiggy could mean the dining place where the payments from dine out or the bookings from dine out are happening. Right now, even though in this example you started off with a blanket idea of Swiggy and moved forward, but if you'd just gone ahead and clarified a little bit on what does Swiggy mean for the interviewer, what does it mean for you, it really, really makes a big, big difference in terms of how it changes your perception towards the final question, right? So that is how important clarifying questions are. And that is why asking them is so important. We'll get down to frameworks. A framework that I really love and I use in my product management journey as well. We'll talk about that in detail, but that is how important clarifying questions are, right? The next is pause and think. Another very obvious run of the mill thing which people take for granted, but it's tempting to jump to what you think the first when someone says something. And I think it's something that's very inherent between us. For us, I mean, a lot of quizzes that we play are fastest finger first. A lot of uh, a lot of our culturally, schools reward people who raise their hands first. I mean, on a different tangent, but it sort of doesn't promote pausing and thinking as much as it should, or as much as and I'm not just talking about us, I'm just talking about the entire world. It just does not promote taking a pause, thinking, ensuring that you are clear in your mind before you even start, is something that you need to uh, figure out. Now, there is a dichotomy at play here, right? Product managers by design are good talkers. Product management managers by design are, um, you know supposed to be excellent at communication, which means that you feel the urge of having a response the moment you see a question, right? It's important to stop and not speak. It's important to think and then speak, right? It's You always are in that zone when you're in an interview with all the pressure on top, that the interviewer expects me to how do I put it, to say something, and that is how I'm going to judge. But trust me, time flows much slower in an interview for the interviewer than it flows for you. For you, the interview would happen in a ziff, and you would feel that, oh, I'm missing out, I'm not saying. For the interviewer, it's very calmer. So you taking more time, it plays into his domain and his thought process. So don't worry about that at all. They'll also, I tend to feel, in terms of interviews I've given and I've taken, is people appreciate pauses. People appreciate you being structured and calm and answering questions after you've thought through them. So pausing and thinking is much more important than the importance that people give. I know the problem is all of this tends to go out of the window when you're in that crunch boiling situation of, okay, design a library for the old people, and then you've got 100 thoughts in your mind. Okay, the library should have this, it should be big fonts, this, that, and suddenly you're almost compelled to say some of them. But you need to practice pausing. You need to practice thinking before you speak, and you need to actually practice the art of gaining value out of that thought, because just pausing and then saying the same thing doesn't make sense. Pausing effectively is a time that you need to use to structure the answer, to go back to the uh, basics that you're learning here, for example, and then from there come back, right? Number 4 is structuring your answer. So again, product management could might as well be called structure management. A product manager needs to be as structured as possible, and that is something that everyone who's interviewing you is looking forward to. They are The number one thing that they're looking forward to is how you can structure your answer the best, and the simplest structure you can put forward to is something that people need to, or the interviewer needs to look at. So how I like to put this as is, think of it as a story, as a narrative, and break it down into components that people or the interviewer understands. Making things simpler and simpler and simpler and simpler is a PM's role, and in effect is sort of their superpower, right? So that is why structuring is extremely important. We will learn a few structures as we go deeper into this conversation today. But it's, again, the structure is something that is something that you need to actively practice, and only then you'll be able to uh, uh, you know get a hang of it, get a hold of it, and get it, I mean, pretty much right off your thought process. Not take a lot of time in structuring things, right? We'll get to structuring in more detail, so not going in further detail on this slide. Explain is the fifth part of how do you look at things. And now picture this, right? You're in an interview situation. Your interviewer has had like a long day, something broke. The TA team got something added on their calendar for an interview. He doesn't always want to be in the interview, right? Which is why you need to be sure that you are giving him enough explanations and you are making things simpler for them, right? uh, Again, explanation doesn't mean going down a rabbit hole of talking a lot, but explanation again links to structure, where you are able to structure and then you're able to explain that structure. So think of it as the core of your interview, right? Unless you are able to structure and present a a very drilled down, crystallized final form of your answer, of your ideas. You might have really really great ideas, you might have really really strong structure, but if you're not able to explain it to the person in front, it's pointless. This is what involves a lot of your assessment. Understand where the interviewer is, understand what he expects, pick up things on things that make him excited about the conversation and double down on them. That's how uh, you need to explain. It's again a complicated skill, because it's somewhere in that uh, in the cross of the Venn diagram between being a great communicator, being a great listener, and being a great observer, right? And if you are all the three, it's easy for you to take crystals out of this Venn diagram and explain things better, right? So again, general thought process on explanation is, how can I make it simpler for the guy in front of me? How can I make it even more simpler? How can I make it even more simpler? That is the thought process behind explanation. And finally, the sixth point, that is fundamental to every product interview, is checking in. Too often, midway through product interviews, things go bad. Things don't stay uh, like they started. You started with a great flow, you got a great couple of personas, you were going well, you got into one solution, and then you just drifted away, right? It's important to keep checking in. How do you check in? Again, you realize that, I mean, there are three places when you should definitely check in. One is, you notice the body language of the interviewer, and that's something that's changing a bit. He's just, uh, feeling a little off the whole conversation, and that is when checking in is absolutely necessary. You realize that you have yourself strayed away from the original path. You started to solve monetization, you're certainly solving engagement, and you didn't even know it. And you've strayed away from that path. That is when again you have to check in. And then finally, happens a lot, where you tend to forget the original point, tend to forget the original goal. You were solving something for smartwatches, and suddenly you've sort of forgotten the digital aspect of it completely, and your product is just a watch now. You These are things that happen all the time in product interviews. That is why checking in is super critical. There are a couple of frameworks and ways in which you should check in, and that is something that we will talk about in more detail towards the end of this slide as well. Right. So yeah. So to summarize, taking notes, listening aggressively, asking clarifying questions, pausing, taking a moment, structuring what you're going to say, and then saying it, structuring your answer, explaining that structure as simply as possible, and checking in again and again, and if needed, pivoting. Those are six sort of core tenets along with around which every product management interview is built. This sort of gets 20, 25, 30% of the job done. Of course, the rest of the job is more complicated, and all of those things with variables associated, but this is something that you should start off with when you look at product management interviews. Right. Uh, great. Cool. Let's move on to the next slide, which is on the frameworks of problem solving. Right now, we're getting into the core of what we are here for. So we understood the six tenets on approaching every product management problem. But like you would have said, you would have figured or felt when we discussed the previous slide, you would have figured that those are the bare minimums. Those are things that you need to do all the time, right? But problem solving is where the art of it starts. Right now, what do I mean by the art? Not very often people think about the problem enough before solving them. So a problem statement is given to you, and you go forward and say, huh, this is something that's right up my domain. I'll figure out solutions, and there is where we go in. That is, of course, I'm sure a lot of you already know it. Those of you who don't, that's pretty much the most sure shot way of not getting selected, which is jumping into solutions right away when you hear a problem. You need to take a pause, you need to take a break, and it's not easy, which is why frameworks are there. So I feel frameworks shouldn't bind you. but frameworks are important for you to, I mean, figure out things when you are having a tough time. So you got a question and you just don't know how to start. You always have a framework to go back to. If things are going well, if you are already in the zone, getting things right, getting the structure right, get going forward, and the interviewer also, the whole vibe is great. It feels right. But most of the times, frameworks are really really important for you to even make that connection in the first place, right? We're going to discuss two frameworks. Both of them are equally important and really interesting. Of course, not my frameworks per se, but these are frameworks that I've read and then built upon to give it a lot more flavor in terms of how I look at product interviews and cracking them, right? So let's look at them. The first one is the broad then deep framework. Now, what does broad then deep mean? Let's say you're solving a problem, right? Uh, the first thing you tend to do, like I said in that Swiggy problem that we mentioned earlier, is you tend to have a rough idea of your problem and go forward to it. What this restricts is it restricts breadth of thought, right? Like we said, if we take Swiggy and take it on face value and move forward, we'd pretty much most likely be solving food delivery, right? But the the necessary framework to go broad first and then to go deep allows you to consider multiple options, right? Allows you to take a moment and not go with your first instinct, right? Our minds are very comfortable when things are segregated into buckets, right? Our minds are very comfortable when, like from school, right? Extracurricular is a different bucket, art is a different bucket, science is a different bucket, literature is a different bucket. Right from there to college, where open credits is a different bucket, core is different, electives are different, right? Sports is different, etc. And now even in work, where you have departments whose jobs are well defined, the mind is very well tuned to accepting things that have been very clearly bucketized, and the broad then deep framework capitalizes on that, right? It basically ensures that first you go broad. So let me take an example for this. Let's assume you are solving a problem for Swiggy again, right? And you are in solving it for food delivery, or you are solving it for and what you are trying to figure out is, you're trying to figure out a way by which you can recommend meals to your audience or to your users, etc. Right? Now, this is the problem statement. The moment you get this problem statement, applying a broad then deep framework to this ensures that you first bucketed the problem into multiple buckets. For example, in this situation, what you're looking to do, what am I looking to do? I'm looking at personalizing meals. That's the problem statement, right? Now, the moment I go broad, I have buckets along with which meals could be personalized, right? Meals could be personalized based on taste. Meals could be personalized based on the time, or the day, the time of the day they are required in, lunch, dinner, breakfast, etc. Meals could be personalized on nutritional value, which is healthy, fruits, oats, I don't know, all of those things. And meals could be personalized based on family requirements, which is not necessarily any of these three. Meals are just personalized based on what I need when I need. So there is no, that's an open bucket. Now, the moment you've broken it down into these four buckets, you now have the first bucket, which is saying, okay, I want to personalize meals for taste, right? Now you need to go deeper into this, in this bucket of taste. Earlier, if you didn't bucket it into these domains, what you would have done is, you would have probably picked up a vague idea of some user putting in his thoughts and some AI doing some magic, and based on that being able to recommend a meal to it. Now, that's a very vague thought, and especially in an interview, that's a very, that's a poor way of, of telling how you are uh, how you're going to go about it, right? The moment you've bucketed it into saying that, hey, I am looking at taste, I am looking at delivery, I am looking at location of delivery, I am looking at an open bucket where my preferences change and I want to personalize based on that, and I want to personalize based on time of delivery, right? The moment you've broken it down into these buckets, you have a lesser chance of missing out on things, and you've actually infinitely more times displayed structure than what could have been expected if you have gone in directly saying that, ha, personalization means doing some AI, personalization means doing taking some feedback from users and changing things on top of that, right? So broad then deep means problem is personalization, break it down into broad buckets. In this example, our broad buckets was what? uh, uh, Taste. Our broad bucket was time, geography, etc., and so on, right? Now, the next step towards this framework is going deep inside each bucket, right? Now, how do you go inside each bucket, right? The first thing that you do is within taste, what are the next level of broad buckets I can keep for personalization, right? Now, within taste, the broad buckets are what? The broad buckets could be based on your geography or based on your place of birth, which is homemade food, nostalgia, etc., and that's the domain of personalization. The second is someone who has and a preference for an extra ingredient. For example, someone who has preference for more spicy food, or someone who has a preference for uh, more, I don't know, sweet, I guess, in some kinds of food, right? And that again are two broad buckets that you figured out within this bucket of taste, right? uh, you can ideate and brainstorm on even more buckets. Let's say what more can happen from a broad perspective in taste. You've got my original nostalgia, you've got my current geography, you've got my food element requirements, you've got my uh, dietary preferences. Right now, dietary preferences are things like a lot of people would want X more in their food compared to Y, right? So that's again a broad bucket that will get broken down into sub buckets later on, right? So that is how broad then deep works. It basically means you take the problem statement, break it down into three or four or five broad ideas. I usually go with three because that sort of fits into our next framework as well, which we'll talk about. uh, then each of those three, you break them down into again three buckets, where you have some broad ideas for each of those buckets, and you keep doing that till the time you start getting a lot more clarity about the problem, right? So in this case, personalization for meals, personalizing it based on taste, personalizing it based on nostalgia, and then suggestions of food that is from the person's native place. So your feature here would, I mean, obviously I'm jumping, but I'm jumping just to give you a little sense of how this would end up. A feature in this thread would be something that looks at your origin state, origin town, looks at things that were popular there, and so on and so forth, and probably suggests meals based on that in your area, right? And that is a personalized thread that's going on. Apart from this, let's say you picked up personalization and medical prescription as a broad bucket, where food that is prescribed to you by a doctor, and from there you go on into low fat, low carbs, let's say, and high in protein kind of food. From there, you say, let's say it goes down into a bucket of medical conditions you might be facing, diabetes, etc., where you are tailoring and personalizing the food based on those medical conditions, right? So those are completely two different solutions, both pretty much very impactful, because one is playing on a mass nostalgia of giving users what they had, let's say, in their childhood days from their hometown, and the other is solving a very critical pain point of them being able to access food that is recommended by top experts in a medical condition that they have. But you will never be able to get to this level of clarity and thought process if you don't break down the problem in something like in something like in something like what we did, right? uh, uh, so that is how we look at the broad then deep framework. To clarify this a little more, I'll go with an example, which is, again, one example is something that I explained already. The other one is another example that is for edtech, right? So now let's assume your question is or your problem is to figure out what would be the best edtech product 10 years down the line in India, right? Now, what are your broad buckets here? I've just mentioned three. There are obviously more players, but I've just mentioned three. Now, your broad buckets are Byju's, Unacademy, Upgrad, right? Within Byju's, what can you look at? You can look at competition, product, target market, vintage. Within competition, you can look at saying that, okay, existing competition, upcoming competition. Existing competition ke andar, you would have Vedantu and Physics Wala, etc., etc. Those kind of companies who are competitions for them, right? Product ke andar you can go down and say, okay, what is the innovation? What is the product right now? What is it? What is the roadmap likely to be? So unless you break it down into these buckets, these broad buckets, then you go deep inside each bucket, then you break it down into another set of broad buckets, then you go deep inside those buckets, you will not be able to figure out answers to questions like these, which are very vague in terms of, hey, who's going to capture the most market in the next 10 years, right? So the Swiggy example and then the edtech examples are two core examples that I feel would help you understand this. We'll pause for questions in a bit, where we'll take a few questions. I'm sure this might have triggered a lot of thoughts, which we'll address in a bit. But hopefully this is something that is clear. I'll just rewind before I take a little pause for questions. Broad then deep framework is a simple framework that allows you to utilize the compartmentalization of the brain. It ensures that you first break down uh, your problem statement into broad directions, and then you keep breaking down those broad directions into the next set of broad directions till the time you achieve a lot of clarity, or till the time you achieve a lot of clear thought process, right? Let's move on quickly to the next part, which is the triangle method, right? So we learned the broad and deep framework, which is a framework that helps you break down things into broad buckets and then break down things into further buckets to understand the problem in deep and then ideate solutions. The next is triangle method, right? This is one that I briefly talked about when we were talking broad and deep as well. You, like I said earlier also, you need to understand that interviewers are usually tired and are taking multiple rounds in one go or multiple rounds in a day. The worst thing you can do is talk vaguely and not be good with your communication, right? The triangle method is a great way to be very crisp with your communication, right? You are applying the broad then deep framework, triangle method works on top of it, right? So the triangle method is what? You start with three directions, pick one of those three, you break it down into three more, describe those three, and then keep checking and pivoting with the interviewer. So very straightforward, very simple way to do it. We applied it when we were doing the example last time as well, but wanted to cover it in a lot more detail, uh, looking at this slide, which is, again, like we said, Swiggy, taste, geography, uh, dietary preference or medical prescription. Within taste, three more, and this. The number of tiers you need to go to is usually between three and four. The number of vertical tiers you need to go to is usually between three and four. So that is a very nice way of not inundating the interviewer with so much information, and also making sure that you have enough in hand. I think I covered a bit of the slide in one of the answers that I gave during the session. So that is something that is there. uh, Three is because, like I earlier also said, it's like the sweet spot between what comes to your mind the first, what comes after that as a slightly second afterthought, and the third one is usually a deeper thought through, not so straightforward kind of things. Right. So that is how you need to break down your story, or you need to break down your problem and your solution. Right. So right now what we have covered is a general framework of problem solving. So what we have covered is, uh, we have looked at things that are broad. We have looked at then breaking it them down into another set of broad ideas and then keep going there. We have also quantified how much is enough to give to an interviewer. To give to an interviewer is what is the next step that we understood. We also before that covered six basic tenets of product management interview questions. Right. What we are going to next is the heart and soul of any product management interviews, right, which is the product design questions. Right now, what are product design questions? Product design questions are simply designated to have to have an assessment of the candidate's inherent sense of building a nice product. Right. These are, I mean, you wouldn't find these questions anywhere else in any other role. You would also have a lot of fun in solving these questions if you are you know looking at them from a whole different inquisitive perspective. And it also is the most testing round where you can get really complicated problems, or you can get really uh, interesting problems that are not so straightforward to solve. Right. They test pretty much end to end of your product management. They test how your design thought processes. They test user empathy. They test your understanding of the industry, your vision, strategy, and at the very core of it, uh, your passion towards product management. Right. uh, so that is how we are going to dive deep into the product design questions. We'll first understand how do you approach answering these questions. Right. So very easy framework, a 5 step framework to solve. A product sense and product design are usually interchangeable. So you might find me using those terms interchangeably. It basically means something in the similar thought, which is basically coming and saying I would design a question, a problem solution for you, and that would be a product. Right. So let's look at the framework of answering design questions. Right. The number one step is to clarify the situation. We covered how important this is earlier in the presentation as well. The more you know about the problem statement, the more you understand about what the problem statement means, what the product in the problem statement means, what the uh, goal of the entire initiative means, the better you will be able to come up with a possible solution. The second step is to understand users and their jobs to be done. Now, this is a very critical core part of solving a product design problem. This is how people test empathy. This is how people test your sharpness for understanding user needs and wants. And that is why frameworks and uh, practice here is super super critical. Right. Then you move on to prioritizing pain points, uh, which are you know uh, your ability to be in the shoes of your customers, and based on that, you being able to figure out what challenges or what irritants they are facing in the journey of your product. The next step is to brainstorm ideas and solve these pain points with a prioritized solution. We'll talk about how to prioritize as well. And finally, is to conclude and summarize. So it's a 5 step process. You clarify the situation, you understand the user persona and their job to be done, you pick their pain points, you solve them through brainstorming ideas, and finally, you summarize when you conclude. Right. So typical problem statements that you would hear in answering Product design questions will be questions like design a high tech refrigerator, design uh, Uber for people who are in wheelchairs, design libraries for old people, improve the experience of Bangalore airport, improve monetization at WhatsApp, etc., etc. Those are the kind of questions you will hear in product design. And this is the broad framework that you need to apply whenever you approach a product sense problem. Right. Uh, let's move on and let's start with uh, the first, which is clarifying the situation. Right. How do you clarify the situation? My favorite framework and my favorite way of clarifying a situation is breaking the situation down. We'll take a quick example. Again, let's take the example for Swiggy, and let's take you are solving for the delivery personnel or the delivery partners that Swiggy have, and you are trying to improve their safety. Right now, clarifying this question doesn't mean asking run of the mill questions in terms of is there some age we are looking at, is there some gender we are looking at, etc., etc. Clarifying the situation means you first break down the problem into broad directions. Right. For example, in the statement I said your broad directions are safety, delivery partners, food delivery. Right. If someone, for example, asks you improving to improve the monetization at WhatsApp, your broad directions are improve revenue and WhatsApp. Right now, these are three core ideas that gel together to form the problem statement. For each of these ideas, apply something that is known as the 5W and 1H. What is 5W and 1H? 5Ws are why, who, where, when, and what. H is how. Right. So let's look at the example that we put above, which is improving revenue generation on WhatsApp. Right. Let's look at improve. Right now, the clarifying question in your mind that should come is, why do we need to improve this? Now, depending on where you are, this might be a good question to ask, this might be not a good question to ask. For example, if the interviewer has given you context on, hey, we are looking at additional revenue sources in India from WhatsApp, which is why we are exploring it, it doesn't make sense to ask this question, but it does make sense to know that you know the answer of it. So you know the why of improve. Right. Improve who are we improving revenue generation for, or who are we improving revenue generation from? Are we improving it from business users, direct consumers? Are we improving it from enterprises who use WhatsApp for promotions? Who basically gives us those kind of answers? Right. Is there a geography? Where are we improving it? Are we improving it from a certain geography? Are we improving it from a certain type of customers, etc.? Right. Similarly, when is how soon we want to do it, how far we want to go. What is something that it's not good to ask because that's something that you will be building, and how is something again that you will be building, and that is why you may not have the answer. You can also still ask how in terms of, are we looking to go digital, are we looking for offline presence, etc., etc. Second broad direction is revenue. Now, why do we want revenue? Again, similar to why do we want to improve? Who do we want revenue from? Similar, you don't need to ask these questions. So you just need to keep them aside in a bucket of things you know, right? Uh, where do you want revenue from is again a question that you may already have answers for because of your earlier breakdowns, or you may not. If you don't, then you ask that question. And similarly for the other W's and H as well. Right. When it comes to WhatsApp, you may have a general understanding of what WhatsApp is, but WhatsApp would have its own nitty-gritties as well. For example, there are features that work almost as independent products. I mean, communities is almost like an independent product. WhatsApp business is a different product altogether, etc., and so on and so forth. So that is why break down the statement into broad directions. Once you've broken it down into broad directions, you then ask the 5Ws and 1H for each of those broad directions. And that is how you get a better understanding of the situation. So, a very straightforward framework, a very robust framework. It obviously ensures that you get a hang of everything, you don't miss much, but it also means you need a lot of practice, because you can't spend all of the time doing this. You can't spend all of the time asking 5 Ws 1H for every direction. You have to be very quick in your mind and keeping only the important ones in your mind and putting them. That is how you need to approach clarifying the situation. Whenever you get an interesting point from the interviewer, note it down and then use them when you brainstorm solutions. So, for example, when you are asking where do we want this improvement from, and the interviewer has mentioned a particular geography, that's an interesting point and you need to note down and incorporate it in your solutions, right? Or in terms of what does revenue mean, the person comes back and says, hey, WhatsApp is doing X billion of revenue right now. We would probably want a 5% impact on that. So that means you already know what is the scale of revenue, and that is something that you need to incorporate when you do your solutionizing. So that is why clarifying the situation is super critical, super important. The most easy way of doing this is break down the entire thing into broad directions. Once you've broken down into broad directions, ask 5 Ws and 1H. Once you've done that, note down the interesting points and then use them later. So very, very critical, very, very underrated, very, very easy to understand, uh, which is why it becomes uh, it might be a caveat, because you might just get mired in asking too many clarifying questions, which is why it needs to be practiced a lot. But the best framework of absolutely clarifying the situation is break down 5W1H, note down your points. Right. Once you've clarified the situation and you've understood what it needs to be, you go on to identifying personas. Now, what is a persona? A persona is an idea of a user who has certain needs that cater to a group of people, right? So, what I mean by this is, let's say you've got a persona that how do I put it? Let's say, again, let's take the Swiggy example, and someone who goes to office and needs dinner in the evening or needs dinner at night. Now, you could have different personas in this based on age, gender, earning capacity, etc., etc. But what you need to make sure is that all of them are the same persona, because they have the same goal. How do we talk about goals? This is very critical, because this is where we introduce the concept of jobs to be done. What is a job to be done? A job to be done in its essence is the core job that a person needs to get done from your product. I'll tell you how. A lot of times when we brainstorm personas, right? We brainstorm, let's say, a persona for Swiggy, we will go and say, okay, someone who is of this age is a persona, gender based persona, occupation based persona. But the problem with all these personas is they all pretty much have the same job, right? uh, they all have exactly the same job of getting food when they need it, right? So no matter if you solve for an occupation uh, of a product manager versus an occupation of a doctor, it is going to give you the same solution, right? Which is why brainstorming different jobs to be done is critical when you identify personas, right? Now, what are these personas? Let's take an example of Swiggy, and let's take an example of what we can see on the graph here. Usually pick four personas as or maybe more if you can brainstorm more, but as a rule of thumb, I tend to pick 3 to 5 personas. Most of my time is spent on the first common persona, which is the guy you solve it for, right? For example, for Swiggy, the person who wants food when he is not getting it made in his home is a common persona, and that's my first persona. The job to be done for this common persona is just ordering food when there is no replacement available. The second common persona is person who needs food every day or every evening. Now, the core of both of them is getting food, but their jobs are different, because for one person, the job of Swiggy is to replace their cook when needed. The other person, Swiggy's job is to be their cook, right? These are two common personas which cater to 65% of Swiggy's user base on a very rough basis, right? The numbers here don't need to be exact, but broadly these two personas are personas that take up the most of Swiggy's user base, right? Next up is the other side persona. Now, what is the other side persona? If there is something that is getting delivered, there is an other side which is actually facilitating it, the delivery personnel and the restaurant, right? Far too often people miss out the other side persona and just solve for the common persona, and that just shows a lack of breadth of thought, right? So the other side persona is also important. Give it 20% weightage of your thought process and of your thought domain whenever you're looking at it. And finally is the moonshot persona. Moonshot persona is a persona that has very little users or that Swiggy hasn't been able to capture. For example, in this, a moonshot persona would be tier 3, or someone in Ladakh or someone in Andamans, or I don't know, right? So these are very moonshot personas where you don't really have a penetration right now, but you can brainstorm ideas and brainstorm jobs to be done for them, which can actually multiply uh, you know uh, your impact for the solution that you're brainstorming, right? So two key takeaways here. Number one, job to be done is extremely critical. Your personas need to have different jobs to be done. For example, in this case, we took a persona for him, Swiggy was a replacement for their cook. We took a persona whose job was for Swiggy to be their cook. We took a persona for whom Swiggy's job was to give them livelihood, the personnel. And we took another third persona for him, for whose Swiggy's job was to be able to look at great food videos. Right now, this is a moonshot persona who Swiggy hasn't solved much for, but this is something that probably they want to solve for and make money out of. Right. So that is how you brainstorm personas. At the core of it, each of them must have a different job to be done. A lot of times we are solving for the same job to be done. For example, we are solving for food delivery, but in the garb of solving for a working professional and solving for a homemaker. But whereas the core need for both of them is same. So look at your personas as a group of people who are able to deliver, uh, who you are able to deliver rather an experience that solves their need from the product. How do you do that? You identify their jobs to be done, and once you identify their jobs to be done, you then break them down into uh, two really common personas. Then the third one is an other side persona, and finally the last one is a moonshot persona that they haven't catered to yet. Right. So of course, identifying persona is next. Moving on. The next is finding pain points. This is where it starts getting easier. I think the hard part is personas and job to be done. It starts getting easier when you identified clear personas and you are looking for pain points. In my mind, in my thought process, there are four core pain points that you can solve for any product. You can either improve health, you can either improve or make more time available, you can either save money or create money, or you can either give a sense of satisfaction. Products that help in health at the moment, of course for different personas is different, but products that save health are the most compelling products built. Products that can actually make a difference in your health, for example x-ray machines, for example MRI scans. Those are products that have made life changing advancements because they were focused on health, right? The next comes products who can create or save money, which is again products like, I mean, investment products for some example, job creation products, like Swiggy again, for example, giving personnel the ability to deliver and make money. The products that save time come third, and the products that give a general sense of satisfaction come fourth, because it's vague to quantify satisfaction. So your pain points need to be aligned with one or more of these. If you can solve something that makes you healthy, that saves your time, that gives you money and satisfies you mentally, physically, or your thought process, that is the best product to ever exist. I don't think there is a product that exists right now apart from, I don't know, maybe oxygen. Uh, there is nothing that exists right now in that domain, but you need to align the pain points for your personas with each of these broad directions. You need to look at, okay, if I am solving for a health for a delivery partner for Swiggy, can I solve a health related pain point for my persona? Safety is a massive pain point that you can solve, right? Which is health related. Insurance is another thing that you can solve, which is health related. Regular checks, regular visits to hospitals, etc., are another pain points that you can solve for that person. Creating money is another problem that Swiggy solves for a completely different persona, which is restaurant owners. It's solved the ability of getting more business from an online world, which is why it works for that persona. It saved time for us, which is the B2C customers. It's not, we don't have to call, we don't have to go, we can just order it on the app. And it gives a sense of satisfaction because more often than not the food we eat is decent quality. So products that tend to solve all of this for different, you can't solve the same for the same persona. It's impossible to think that I'll have a product that will solve my health issues, that will save time, that'll give me money and everything. It's impossible to do it for one persona, but the same product can do it for multiple personas. And Swiggy, I feel, I mean, why I chose Swiggy as a running example for this presentation is because it ticks a lot of these boxes in terms of how it's built and how many pain points it solves. It generates money for some people. It also takes care of the health for some people. It also ensures that time is saved, and finally it also ensures that we leave satisfied. So that is how we look at personas, and what we look at majorly is how the pain points for these personas are aligned to, I mean, one of these four, right? uh, how so why I mean, why we need to look at this more than you know so there are two ways in which typically people approach it, right? One is you have a product, and that product can solve things, and you just sort of swift along those lines and constrain yourself to that. I feel the better way to solve pain points is always being user first. Of course, you can come back, for example, for Vyapar where I work, I feel health is probably not something that we can solve with a business management software. And it's okay to say that this is a pain point I am not going to solve. But the ability to brainstorm and have the pain point is something that you need to definitely uh, uh, you know be cognizant of, and be also cognizant of when you're choosing a product or when you're building something. If you can build something that straddles along this for different personas, nothing like it. Which is why being user first makes more sense, because it doesn't restrict you, and it also helps you build that things that really add value. Now what happens is, over a period of time, we only build for satisfaction because we've solved the core use cases along money, time, health from where the product started. So satisfaction is the most incremental pain point solution ever, because one, it's very vague. You don't really know who's satisfied, who's not. Second, some people buy it, some don't. Health is something, if you are able to display value, no one's going to compromise. Money, I don't need to even say about that. Time, very quantifiable again. So pain points need to be aligned with it. Of course, it's important to later on align them with your eventual company and product, but it definitely makes more sense to be user first, use this framework to figure out pain points, and then from there go back and solve. Right. So once we've figured out pain points, we will brainstorm solutions, right? The first step to brainstorming solutions is to prioritize your pain points. Now, once you've got pain points, you're pretty much on the home stretch. If you've done a good job of figuring out pain points, solutionizing should be straightforward. There is a very famous prioritization mechanism that I have used here: reach, impact, confidence, effort, RICE. I'm sure a lot of you might have heard about it. If you've not, and this is the first time you're hearing about it, uh, rice is a very interesting framework. It basically tells me three good things, one bad thing. Reach is how many people are you going to reach with your solution or your pain point. Rather, for example, in the Swiggy example, if we are doing something in terms of providing healthy food, right, and solving health as a pain point. Now, reach is the number of people we are going to expose this to. So, the number of people who would uh, see a banner or see the recommendation or see healthy food on their Swiggy app is the reach. Impact is what percentage of them will convert. So, if you show great healthy food, quinoa or I don't know, brown rice or whatever to people, what percentage of them would actually click on it or tap on it and go forward and make an order? That's the impact that you're expecting the entire solution to bring, or the entire pain point to or the solution to the pain point to have. The confidence is, what confidence do you have inherently that this will work? Like, for example, I don't have a lot of confidence in healthy eating, so that is something that you would give in as your own personal touch to the entire prioritization framework. And effort is very quantifiable. If it's a tech product, it's usually number of sprints, man hours. If it's a physical product, it's again number of man hours that you need to give to develop it. So once you've got your pain points, you need to prioritize them. Prioritizing, I've not covered it in more detail here, mainly because I feel prioritization frameworks, there are at least 5 to 10 strong frameworks that exist. You can pick any one of them. Rice is probably the best, and once you have rice, you can pretty much pick a pain point that is going to make the most sense before you go and solve, right? So that is how you would that is how you would break down and prioritize your pain points. Usually, the rice ends up with a score. The score is calculated by reach into impact into confidence divided by effort. That gives you a score within like 90, 100 kind of range. I typically give a scale of 1 to 5 to each, so that my scores are like sort of balanced out in the range of 1 to 25 ish. Uh, and that's how my prioritization works. It's a great framework, easy to apply. And honestly, if you've done your pain pointing well, this is, like I said, this is the home stretch. These are easy things to do. These are things that you're almost ticking off towards the end of your interview. So we figured out pain points, we have prioritized them. The easiest part is brainstorming solutions. Uh, some people get daunted by the thought of brainstorming solutions. Ki, there is so much to do. How will I figure out what to do, etc., etc.? So, what do we have for it? We have another framework for it. So, this is a very simple framework. It's nothing very different, but it's very, very clearly, it works a lot. You need to start with a big ideas list. Now, this ideas list are list that you need to build over time. You need to read tech news, you need to read product news, science news, even fiction books, for example. I mean, uh, even, I mean, Game of Thrones could suggest you a product idea for some product that you're building. So pick 3 or 4 core topics and really study them well in terms of how to build that big list of ideas. Right now, for example, pick health as a topic or pick fitness as a topic and build a really deep understanding through magazines, articles, books, and blogs and podcasts, etc. on it. Pick pick geopolitics and gain a lot of understanding through interviews and news and podcast on them. So 3 to 5 of your favorite topics and study them really hard, and that will give you inherent ideas. Now, you might feel ki, okay, how will geopolitics give me an idea for building a product for, I don't know, tier 3 cities in India? It will, because it will give you access to knowledge that can be reshared or refurbished as something that gets applied when you are creating that list of ideas. So, very simple. The first step towards being able to brainstorm solutions quickly is have a big ideas list, is have a list of what is possible, what is going on, and how I can leverage that in my product interviews, right? uh, the next is applying these big ideas. uh, Now once you have figured out these big ideas, now it's the time to ensure that they get applied on your industry. So like I said, if you are studying geopolitics and you have figured how some country in Europe is solving hunger, and you are solving Swiggy's last mile delivery in tier 3 cities in India, you can use that information and apply those ideas in your service and your industry, right? So critically think about a few of these ideas and apply them to real world products. So step 1, brainstorm ideas around 3 or 5 of your favorite topics and study them really well. Step 2, uh, take out these topics and apply them to real life products that you could use. So for example, if you are very good with learning human history, with learning, I mean, modern history, how can you apply that knowledge into WhatsApp? So these kind of ideation exercises are exercises that will critically help you in becoming better solution brainstormers, in becoming better solutionizers in an interview situation. Most of the times, the pain points and the prioritized pain points have done half this job. For example, if I am solving, like I gave the other example, from, for example, health conscious food for people, etc., etc., inside Swiggy. I have already pretty much clarified what I need to do. The only new thing I want to add, or the only futuristic thing I want to add when I'm brainstorming these solutions, is things that are not so obvious but are coming from my external knowledge. For example, how a country in Europe solved its hunger, or how the latest tech is enabling two people to talk, or two people to transfer money without internet, right? So that is what you can then imply and apply in your ideas. But prepare the big ideas list by researching 5 of your good favorite strong product topics. Apply those topics into real world products as an ideation exercise, and now you have the structure to keep building upon it, right? Always ensure that when you are talking about solutions, you are also giving pitfalls, right? You are also giving the other side, right? Because what happens is, the interviewer might be thinking about this, ki, okay, this is a big idea, but this guy has not even thought about so and so. So always ensuring that your big ideas have enough pitfalls or have enough downsides, because everything is going to have a downside. So having those downsides and mentioning them is the best way to structure your solution, right? So of course, the pain points and the prioritized pain points will already help you with the direction. The big ideas list and their application will help you come up with innovative solutions that you can communicate. Pitfalls is the third thing that you need to add to your solutions, so that uh, your interviewer gets a holistic view of where you are coming from. So that is how solutions get brainstormed. Trust me, if you are able to do the part still prioritizing pain points well, your job is more than half done, because you are pretty much very clear of who you want to solve it, how, what you want uh, to be solved, and only the how is left. The how is usually very straightforward. The brainstorming framework that I've given is more to keep adding more and more ideas to your kitty, so that you can introduce very compelling, very different ideas on top, and use that structure when you are solutionizing. Honestly, I mean, I understand a lot of people I talk to in this, when I'm mentoring, it doesn't don't get it. But if you've done the other part well, this is the easiest part of a product management interview, because you're pretty much just summarizing when you're finding solutions, because everything else uh, is already done. And finally, once that is done, that's that. I mean, you can choose to add a few metrics that help the interviewer understand how you're going to measure the impact. uh, Picking metrics is a different ball game altogether, which I decided to not cover in the presentation, because it would have just gone on for another half an hour. But picking metrics is another important thing that you should definitely research on, in terms of how will you measure your solution. Few pointers when you are presenting the summary: be crisp and concise, focus on the good parts more than the bad, the lulls that you had in the solution. Call out your trade-offs, because call out your pitfalls, call out the problems that your solution can cause, and ask for validation. So pretty much map your journey right from when we started with clarifying questions to when we came to brainstorming solutions. The entire, or even before that, right, when we started from broad then deep to this, the entire framework is things that you need to talk about, but you need to talk it about in bullet points, very crisp, very concise. Please talk about pitfalls, because that is where a lot of the interviewers sort of judge you. So talk about them, and finally ask for validation and recommended solutions from them. So that is about how you would present the solution. And now we'll take an example, right? I will leave the solution to you. I would love if you could drop the answer, the solutions of this problem, uh, in my DMs in LinkedIn or wherever. So I've left that for you. But let's try and answering a question, because it's election season here in Karnataka at least. To how do we encourage voting in India, right? So you start with clarifying questions. What are your broad directions? Product, encouraging, voting, India. India, pretty much clear what it means. We can go deeper in India as well. But again, let's look at product. Apply the 5W1H. Okay. Okay. What is there? Is it a digital product, physical product? When we say, let's say, talk about encouraging, what do we mean by encouraging? Are we encouraging people to go in the existing form of voting, or are we trying to change the process of voting and hence encouraging them, right? So this sort of mixes encouraging voting when you're clarifying and applying the 5W1H on top of it, right? Who is going to vote, because voting is an important thing. So what is the audience that we are looking at when we are looking at voting? When we are looking at, again, the what of voting, what is the election? Is it a local election, national election? And that covers India as well. Just a few examples of some clarifying questions that you could ask. Obviously, if you apply the framework properly, you would have at least 7 to 8 clarifying questions. I have put ones that seemed the most relevant to me, because I could figure out answers of the others. Uh, Personas and job to be done. Young voters, people, first time voters, is that a persona? What is their job to be done? Is their job to be done from voting? Better opportunities, giving a community imprint, finding better infrastructure, contributing to nation building. There could be several jobs to be done from voting that people have. And of course, when you are looking at these personas, I only picked one because I wanted to present it. But if you look at personas, first time voters is a common persona, traditional voters is the biggest common persona, who you can encourage. The other side persona is the people who are asking for the vote, the government, the MLAs, and how you can make something for them so that they can encourage voting. And your moonshot persona could probably be, I don't know, people who are not even eligible to vote yet, maybe 15-year-olds who can vote in deliberation with their parents, or something crazy in that direction, to increase the number of people that vote, or to increase the voting process in India, right? So that is how you brainstorm personas and job to be done. Pain points could be they don't care enough about the voting process. They don't care enough about the change it makes. There is no social capital that they get. They don't see an impact from their votes. They don't see them being relevant in the election, and so on and so forth, right? So I've given a few pointers. I think you would have access to this deck from what I understand. So I've given a few pointers so that you can start thinking. But I would love if you could solve this and maybe send me a message, or reach out to Aries, and I'd love to look at them and have a discussion on how we can build a product that can encourage voting in India. Very quickly, once again, just to relook at the framework, you start with clarifying questions, you then go to job to be done and personas, you then figure out pain points and prioritize them, and finally you brainstorm solutions. So that is what that is a sort of an assignment of such from this session. If you think if this is an interesting problem to solve and this is the good application of what we've learned today, do solve this, and probably reach out to Aries or me on LinkedIn. And there we have it. We are right in the final parts our of our interaction. I see it's 2 p.m., so we've pretty much been very heavy. I'm sure all of you are obviously waiting for your lunch. So I'll quickly go through some tips and tricks before I conclude the session on from an interview. I think someone asked this on chat as well, how to pause. There are two ways to pause: actively and passively. Passive pauses are deliberately pausing just a little longer for allowing your interviewer to chime in. Actively pause. So it initially it feels awkward, but then when you practice mock interviews, you will feel better. Uh, Long pauses or active pauses are basically when you're asking the interviewer, hey, this is the direction I'm taking, if you're okay with the approach. And mostly they would say they're okay, or they would correct you. So very important. As a note, you should not be speaking more than 2.5 minutes at one go. So or I would just go with the famous three. You should not be speaking for more than 3 minutes at any cost when you are in an interview. More than 2 minutes is already a monologue. So just ensure that you are either just taking a slight pause or asking, not active pauses every 5 minutes, passive pauses every 2.5 minutes. Have that rough framework in your mind, right? Always mention trade-offs. I have mentioned this earlier. You solve a product and you have a great idea and you are only going raving about it. Your interviewer is thinking, hey, he's solving personalization, he hasn't thought about the misuse of this data and the privacy policy and all of those things. Mention that, so that you kill that conversation in the interviewer's mind and you kill it for good, right? Keep checking in. You people tend to speak a lot in product interviews, which is why I've probably mentioned it thrice in this presentation. There is, you absolutely need to keep checking in with your interviewers when you're giving that interview. When you're doing it virtually, you have to do more active check-ins than passive check-ins, because uh, you are in a virtual environment. There is no body language. Structure becomes very important, because talking in bullet points, giving him exact clear ideas of what you need to of what he needs to take away is very important. And lastly, build stories, like I covered earlier in my presentation. Build narratives so that he can take your story and take away a positive or a grasp out of it very well, right? Finally, or second last actually, is how to get unstuck, which is a lot of times, I think someone mentioned it in the questions itself when I answered it. You come into a situation where you just don't know how to go forward and you get stuck. This is a point in time where you need to take a pause, take a breather, course correct, and then go back and mention to the interviewer about it, and ask if it's okay to sort of go back to the original point and correct yourself. So don't worry about getting stuck. It happens more frequently than you think. It pretty much happens all the time. So don't worry about that too much. And finally, practice as many mock interviews as you can. Find peers, find mentors, find programs that are able to give you mock interviews, and plenty of mock interviews. I look at product management interviews like cat, and I mean the cat, the exam cat, not like a cat. You are never ready enough for cat. You might give that exam tomorrow, and you might get a better percentile than you give it 3 months later with good preparation. PM interviews are just like that, which means just like cat, you need to prepare, keep preparing. And the best way to do that is to do as many practice mock interviews as possible. Record them, run them by. There are so many good product folks on LinkedIn who are kind enough to review things for you. There are so many good programs that are available where you can come and uh, you know find people who you can jam with in this practice scenario. And that is what is going to really perfect and make a big contribution in your product journey.
Thank you so much for your time. Thanks
Thanks,
once again.
thanks guys, thanks for having me, Aries, and thank you everyone. All the best.